Hello guys, in this video we will talk about Docker networks. So let's get started. So a Docker network is a virtual network that allows containers to communicate securely with each other. Docker offers different network drivers to create these networks, each with its own use cases. So these are some network drivers. So basically there are three types of networks: bridge, none, or host. You can see here to list all the networks, there is a command docker network ls. So you can see here by default there are three networks: bridge, host, or none. So the default network driver for Docker containers is this bridge network. When you create a container without specifying any network, Docker automatically places it on a bridge network. This is why many containers can communicate with each other by default. So let's see about the bridge network driver. You can see here when you start Docker, a default bridge network is created automatically, and newly started containers connect to it unless otherwise specified. You can also create user-defined custom bridge networks. So user-defined bridge networks are superior to the default bridge networks. So let's see this thing in the console. So here I'm going to create a new container without specifying any network. So let's check the Docker images. I'm going to use this image for this tutorial. It is basically a Ubuntu image. I have pushed this image to my Docker repo. You can see here. You can also use this image for your demo. I have already installed some utilities like ping network utilities in this image, which we are going to use in this video. You can also use this image by just copy link from here and you can simply paste it here. So I have already this image. So I'm going to create a container from this image. So let's see, docker run -it and and dash. So you can see our container is now created. So now let's inspect this container. Let's see, docker inspect and so you can see in networks, which network is automatically gets created here by default. So when we create any container, by default, the container is connected to the bridge network. So now we are going to cover all these points one by one, and also we will see the working of all the points in the console. So let's start with this second point. User-defined bridges provide better isolation. So all containers without a network specified are attached to the default bridge network. We have already seen this, but this can be a risk as unrelated services or containers are also able to communicate. So using a user-defined network provides a scoped network in which only containers attached to the network are able to communicate. So in Docker, we can also create our own user-defined networks. And these networks also uses the bridge driver, but they are different from the default bridge driver. So let's see this with an example. So first, let's create a new network, Docker network ls. You can see there are three networks. And to create a network, you have to type the command docker network create. And here you have to mention the name like demo. You can see here it returns the network ID. And again, if we check the network ls, you can see our network is now created with the name demo and the driver is also bridge. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create three containers, two with the default bridge network and one I'm going to connect with the this demo network. So let's create. Here give any name like a container one, and here our first container is now created, and let's create another containers in another form. I'm going to name it with container 2 and to container 1, so it can be easy for you. Here let's here container 2, and now let's create the third container. And here I'm going to connect this container with the network we have just created, that is demo. So we have to mention here the network with the minus minus network, and here mention the network name, that is demo, and here the image name, and here yeah. So our container is now created. So let's see the difference between the default bridge network and the user-defined network. You can say it is the container 1 and container 2. So here, if I check the IP address of this container 2, host name minus I. So here you can see it is the IP address of our this container 2, and also check the IP address of this container 1. So it is the IP address of this container 1. So now let's check the IP address of the container 3. The host name minus I. So here you can see there is a difference. You can see here the container 1 and the container 2 has the IP address with the same subnet. You can see 172.17, 172.17. But the container we just created with our user-defined network, it gets the IP address from the another subnet. You can see 172.22.0.2. So it is one of the major difference between the user-defined and the default bridge network driver. So this container is basically completely isolated from the default containers. So let's verify this. Here from container 2, if I try to ping the container 1, I'm able to ping. You can see ping 172.17.0.2. So it is the IP address of my this container 1. So if I ping it from here, you can see I am able to ping it. But if I try to ping it from here, it will not get any response. So let's see ping 172.17.0.2. You can see it is not getting any response from this server. So you can see here 34 packets transmitted and 100% packet loss. And let's try the container 2 also. Ping 172.17.0.3. And here you can see it is also not able to ping that server. So basically, a user-defined network is more isolated and more secure than the default bridge network. It is also most recommended by the Docker. Now let's see this first point, that user-defined bridges provide automatic DNS resolution between containers. So basically, containers on the default bridge network can only access to each other by IP addresses unless you use the link option. So this link option I have used in one of my video in which I have deployed WordPress using Docker containers. You can see that video on the I button. So basically on a user-defined bridge network, containers can resolve each other by name or alias. So let's see this thing on console. So you can see here I'm able to connect to other containers using its IP address. And here you can see if I ping container 1 from the container 2, it gives us a response. But if I use container name instead of IP address, our container name is this container 1. If I use this, you can see here it gives an error name of service not known. So in the containers that are created using default bridge network, we are not able to use the name to communicate between the containers. But we can achieve that thing using user-defined networks. So let's see. Here is our container 3 that is connected to the user-defined network. To do so, we have to connect our this container to the user-defined container that we have just created. So let's see. First, let's exit this Docker network ls, the demo network, and we have to connect this container to the demo network. So to connect any container, we can use Docker network connect command. Simply, you can use Docker network connect, and here we have to mention the network name, that is demo. And after it, we have to mention the container name, that is container 1. You can see here container 1. Simply click enter. So you can see our this container is now connected to the demo network. So let's verify this. So docker inspect container 1. You can see before there is only one network, that is bridge, but now there are two networks. This container is also connected to the demo network also. So now let's bash into this container. First let's clear the screen. So docker ps minus a. So this is our container 1. Now let's first start this container. Docker start this container. So now let's bash into this container. Docker execute interactive mode and this and bash. So you can see we are in this container. And now let's again check the host name. You can see before there is only one IP address. Now it is also connected to our user-defined network, and now it also gets the IP address from our user-defined network. Now over this container is also connected to the user-defined network. Now let's try to ping this container with its name. We are in this container 3 and ping container 1. Now I am able to ping this container using its name. So now let's see the third point. That is containers can be attached or detached from user-defined networks on the fly. So let's try this on the console. Let's open another command prompt. You can see here our three containers are running and our container 1 and container 3 are already connected to the our user-defined network, that is demo. So now let's disconnect this container 1 from the demo network. So for that there is a command docker network disconnect, docker network disconnect, and now we have to mention the network name, that is demo, and after that mention the container name, that is container 1. So now our this container is disconnected from the demo network. So let's verify this. Just simply inspect this, inspect this container 1. And you can see before there are two networks and now there is only one network here, bridge. So we can connect or disconnect containers to the user-defined networks on the fly. Now next we have the fourth point, that is each user-defined network creates a configurable bridge. That is, if your containers use the default bridge network, you can configure it, but all the containers use the same settings. This thing we have seen before, our container 1 and container 2 get the IP address from the same subnet, that is 172.17.0.2 and 0.3. So if we configure the default bridge network, all the containers use the same setting. In addition, it also requires a restart. So instead of configuring default bridge network, we can configure our user-defined bridge networks. So let's see how we can configure. So here you can see right now we have four networks and we can configure our custom network while creating the network. So let's see. So Docker network create, and here while creating the network, we can pass the subnet, like subnet. We can give here like a, and also we can modify here the gateway. And after that we have to give the name to the network like demo 2 and enter. And again, if we check the network ls, so our demo 2 is now created. So now let's connect our container 2 with this demo 2 and let's check the IP address of the container 2. Here is our container 2, and you can see right now the IP address of our container 2 is this, and let's accept this, and docker network connect, docker network connect, and here the network name, that is demo 2, and here the container, that is container number 2. So enter. So again, let's start this container, docker start, and bash into this container, docker execute. And here you can see we are in this container, and now let's check the host name. You can see here right now we get the IP address from the subnet we just mentioned there. So 172.25.0.2. Now the last point is linked containers on the default bridge network share environment variables. So originally the only way to share environment variables between two containers was to link them using the link flag, which is a legacy method. But this type of variable sharing is not possible with the user-defined networks. So there are some superior ways to share environment variables in the user-defined networks. That is, we can create a Docker volume and we can mount multiple containers to it so they can share information between them. So second, we can use Docker Compose to run multiple containers, and the compose file can define the shared variables. And also we can use Swarm services to take advantage of shared secrets and configs. So that's all about the bridge network driver. We will see the other drivers in our upcoming videos. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.